Hey everyone! We're starting off our dissection by looking at the upper trunk of the rabbit, including the chest area, the arm, and the shoulder on the other side. Take any notes for your upcoming dissection. Think about what muscles to keep an eye out for so that it can proceed as smoothly and efficiently as possible. All right, see you at the end. Look closely at this because you're never going to see it again. This is our mediocutaneous. If you're having trouble locating separations between muscle groups like this, one thing you can look for, if you have any sort of fat deposits, they will happen along those lines. So if you can see here, you can see a little fat deposit kind of tucked in between those muscles. And that will help you kind of just use your closed scissors or your blunt probe to kind of poke at that line of fat deposit, and that will help you get right in there and separate those muscles. You do want to be careful that you are separating muscles and not creating new ones. So as you are separating, look inside, look between those muscle groups for fascia. If you see cobwebby stuff, then you are between muscle groups, and that is like this. If you see this cobwebby material, you're in the right place. You are between muscle groups and you're just separating, and that's good. Especially when separating your pectoralis major and minor complex and your latissimus dorsi, use the serrated edge of your forceps. That can help you actually saw. It's like a little gentle saw, so it's not going to do very well sawing muscle itself, but that separation between muscle, it can provide a little more oomph than the blunt probe. What we're seeing here is that scapula. So you can see that it's just loosely connected to the trunk. And we're seeing the underside of the scapula and the bottom corner, which is attached to our lovely serratus ventralis, which we'll be cleaning off. As you are cleaning out fat in the region of the subscapularis muscle and around the scapula, watch out for vasculature that's embedded in that fat. Because if this side looks good for your circulatory dissection, that can actually save you a lot of time. Looking for your thoracic, rectus thoracix, you want to look for muscle fibers that are going longitudinally as opposed to obliquely like this. And we can see that separation right here. I'm just going to very carefully start to separate those. They might be kind of tightly bound together, but I'm not trying to snip. I'm just trying to use that blade to sneak under this muscle. Just be aware that there are some veins and arteries moving into the arm from the trunk in this area, and you can just kind of leave that put for now. Save that for the circulatory unit. On the brachium, when we move down to the arm, we have the brachium and the antebrachium. This is the medial side, and on the medial side, you're going to want to look out for the epitrochlearis, so the above the trochlea muscle, the epitrochlearis. In the rabbit, it is very thin, and actually at this point closest to the body, it just turns into just fascia, essentially, that is connecting it to the body. So this is no longer muscle fibers, this is fascia. You want to leave that in place so this little dude doesn't go flapping all over. And when you're separating muscles in here, again, be careful about this underlying vasculature. You can see sort of the shadows of blue and red underneath there. So don't go digging around too deep. Just in case your other side, your circulatory side, isn't great, you can still look for it on your muscle side. You'll see on both sides in the antebrachium, these muscles are covered with a pretty intense fascia sheath, so it might be hard to separate those muscles at first. If you can see here, that whole thing, this is just fascia sheath, and you can trim that off of any muscles so that they're more easy to get to. Notice this fascia sheath that is surrounding the antebrachium. This can be really tough to penetrate, so you want to kind of get through at least one area of it. Make a slit all the way down, usually easiest along the ulnar side. So just really superficially cut that sheath and remove it from the underlying muscles. And you can make sure that you're not cutting muscle by looking through it. If it's transparent, it's still the fascia, and you're safe to trim it away. When you're approaching the outside of the shoulder, the whole shoulder blade is covered by some thin sheets of muscles, the trapezius muscles. And we have a cervical trapezius up by the neck, cervical area. And we have a spinal trapezius that comes from the spine of the scapula across the back. And you can see those kind of like little wings. If you tip your specimen up, you can see these are actually a slightly darker color than the surrounding tissue. The spinal trapezius comes off the scapula and makes these two little wings across the back. You will not fully separate this, you just want to be able to lift it up and see it'll still be attached to the spine. If it does come detached, that's fine, but leave it attached someplace so you don't lose it entirely. As you are looking to separate out the spinal trapezius, the best way that I've found is to go from underneath. So go from underneath where your lat dorsi, your latissimus dorsi, is kind of coming up over the back, and then stretch it out so you can see that separation between your spinal trapezius. Right here, you can see it arcing down. Here's the line. And then your latissimus dorsi, which is right here. Use your saw-like edge of your forceps, starting at the armpit, to separate out those two muscles. Looking at the top of your scapula, you can kind of sneak your finger in then underneath the spinal trapezius and look for where it separates from your cervical trapezius. In this bunny, it actually goes quite a ways up, but you can see my blue glove through that space where the muscle fibers are petering out, and this is where you can make that separation. We clear out underneath this tissue, look for where the striations of muscle start again. And if it's transparent, it's just fascia. And you can choose to leave that or trim it away. Either one is fine. Trim just a little. Then you want to leave that cervical trapezius in place. We're going to be approaching it from the bottom front, from that acromion of the scapula, as we separate out our omotransversarius. And this, you may have to pull the scapula a little bit just to get a little bit of tension on that cervical trapezius, to look for the separation between it and the omotransversarius. You can see a little crease right there, but you're looking for that separation of muscle fibers. The two are very nearly blended, so you want to just take a little care. This is the side that I chewed up a little bit, so I'm just going to be extra careful. Notice how before I made any cut, I looked for that to make sure I was separating. I was looking for this fascia to make sure I'm separating muscle from muscle instead of just cutting through an existing muscle. You may or may not have fat stored up underneath here. This guy was just hacking it away. I'm being absurdly careful with this omotransversarius here because I have a really good vein that I want to preserve, so... So it is important to get just right behind the upper arm into that little pit. We can see that's a separation between muscles. We have our spinodeltoid overlaying the infraspinatus muscle, but this larger muscle tucked up underneath on the axillary or ventral or caudal border of the scapula, that's our teres major, and above that the teres minor. We can see those really well tucked into this little groove that we want to clear out so we can see more easily. You do want to be able to get your blunt probe all the way behind your teres minor and come out to separate it from that subscapular muscle. So you can see the blunt probe coming all the way from the base of that muscle. If you have an intact vein at the top of the shoulder, I'm going to leave that in place so we don't have it dislodging and going everywhere. If you're having trouble seeing the difference between the triceps muscles, we have our lateral triceps and our long triceps, triceps brachialis lateralis, triceps brachialis longus. But if you kind of squish them around, you can start to see where the muscles are moving relative to each other and find that little area to kind of coax apart. What can help with the antebrachial muscles, the forearm muscles, on the lateral side especially, is finding those tendons, the very white tendons at the end of the muscles, and following them up towards the elbow as you're trying to separate that fascia sheath, because this is still really tough. But once you get that sheath off, those muscles will be a lot easier to separate. So I'm not snipping, I'm just using that edge to follow the tendons. You don't have to bother trimming the fascia sheath until you are more confident with muscles. So give yourself that time to explore the muscles before cleaning them up along the edges.